Hi, and welcome back to business communication and management communication. Having those difficult conversations is what we talked about last. Now, let's move on into our next chapter, chapter 4, where we'll talk about global communication and diversity. We'll talk about those. Diversity is a very hot topic right now. So, I want to make sure that we also remember that we are coming to you from McGraw-Hill's text on business communication, developing leaders for a networked world. So as I move forward to share my monitor with you, let's get started. So Peter Cardone is the author of this book. And so our objectives this time is describing characteristics of cultural intelligence and its importance for global business leaders and approaches to developing it. And we're also explaining the major cultural dimensions in related communication practices. We're naming and describing key categories of business etiquette and the intercultural communication process. We're also identifying how generational, gender, and other aspects of diversity affect workplace communication. So let's talk about cultural intelligence, CQ. A measure is a measure of your ability to work with and adapt to members of other cultures. This can be developed and improved over time. So what is culture? Culture is shared values, norms, rules, and behaviors of an identifiable group of people who share a common history and communication system. There are many types of culture, such as national, organizational, and team culture. So characteristics of a high cultural intelligence include respect, recognize and appreciate cultural differences, possess curiosity about the interests in other cultures. You avoid inappropriate stereotypes, adjust conceptions of time and show patience. You manage language differences to achieve shared meaning. You understand cultural dimensions. You establish trust and show sympathy and empathy across the cultures. And you approach cross-cultural work relationships with learner mindset, meaning you're learning. You're willing and open to learning. You're building a co-culture of cooperation and innovation. Cultural intelligence is built on attitudes of respect and recognition of other cultures, and you're viewing other cultures as holding legitimate and valid views of approaches to managing business and workplace relationships. Diversity, however, is presence of many cultural groups, and it leads to better decision-making processes. So being curious about other cultures includes studying abroad, learning a new language, developing friendships with international students on your campus, and taking an interest in culture and routine learn about it. I don't know how many of you are doing this. Some of you, if you've had prior experience in the military or traveling abroad, you understand the importance of this and you see the benefits from understanding other cultures. I have taken a couple of courses in other cultures, or language sessions. I've taken Mexican. I've taken or Hispanic language. I've also taken the language of Asian Americans or Asians, which happen to be abroad and broad scope. And you can go through many different languages where that's concerned. Tried to do French. That one's a little hard for me. Sexy, but hard. Avoid inappropriate stereotypes by projected cognitive similarity. And this is the tendency to assume others have the same norms and values as your own cultural group. Outgroup homogeneity effect is a tendency to think members of other groups are all the same, and they're not. And so this percentage of respondents who associate Americans with various different stereotypes or languages, and see how this is viewed. Optimistic, view. Sweden is very optimistic people. Let's see. This is just across the board. Hardworking, talented. This is worth looking at, and this is how people view cultures, various cultures. So culture impacts conceptions of time. People high and CQ, uh, cultural intelligence, show patience. Cultures differ in priorities as related to time. Working with non-native English speakers, you need to avoid quickly judging that others have limited communication proficiency. Articulate clearly and slow down. Avoid slang and jargon. Give others time to express themselves and use interpreters as necessary. So Glow Group's cultural dimensions includes individualism and collectivism, egalitarianism and hierarchy, performance orientation, future orientation, assertiveness, humane orientation, uncertainty avoidance, and gender egalitarianism. So individualism is a mindset that prioritizes independence more highly than interdependence. It emphasizes individual goals over group goals and values choice more than obligation. Whereas collectivism is a mindset that prioritizes interdependence more highly than independence, and it emphasizes group goals over individual goals. It values obligations more than choice. And so individualism and collectivism across cultures, we can see that that as we go down, we see where the individualism as societies are. Um, Netherlands, UK, Germany, and US are all part of those. Um, and societies or cultures where we see high individualism, they discuss individual rewards and goals, they emphasize opportunities and choices, and they spend less time in group decision making. They socialize infrequently with colleagues outside of work, and they network in loosely tied and temporary social networks, as well as they communicate directly to inefficiently deal with work tasks and outcomes. Efficiently, I'm sorry, to deal with work tasks and outcomes. High collectivism is discussed, they discuss group rewards and goals. They emphasize duties and obligations, and they spend more time in group discussion making. They socialize frequently with colleagues outside of work, and they network in tightly knit and permanent social networks. They communicate indirectly to perceive harmony in work relationships. So why, Dr. Carroll, is this important? This is important that we know these things so that we have some idea going in the type of people that we're working with based on their culture. But at the same time, it is still important not to assume everything, but to get to know people, to talk a little bit about where you're all coming from, even when you just meet somebody. I do this all the time. I find it is very effective. It helps me tremendously and cuts down stereotypes. Individualism and collectivism within companies. High on this is collectivism in organization. High on this is Japan, South Korea, China, the Netherlands. Individualism in organizations. Low on this is Italy, Brazil, Mexico, and then you go on out. Variety of individualist and collectivism norms in the US, Japan, and China. As you see, the blue line represents the US, the yellow line is Japan, and the red line is China and how they're looking at things. So one is high on collectivism, China is. Japan is in the middle of both the US and China, whereas the US is high on individualism. Egalitarianism and hierarchy. Egalitarian cultures or people tend to distribute and share power evenly. They minimize status differences, they minimize special privileges and opportunities for people just because they have higher authority. Hierarchical cultures, those that have hierarchies, queens, kings, things of that nature. People expect power differences, follow leaders without questioning them, and feel comfortable with leaders receiving special privileges and opportunities. Power tends to be concentrated at the top. And so we can see where the differences are hierarchy organizations versus egalitarian organization. Netherlands and US and Hong Kong are towards the bottom, whereas South Korea, France, and Germany are high on hierarchy organizations because they have, and the UK, because they have higher order thinking. So communication practices in egalitarian and hierarchical cultures include egalitarianism is decision making is more decentralized. Protocol is really based, guys, on status and is less important and reserved for usually formal business discussions. And subordinates speak more openly with leaders during disagreements in the egalitarian cultures, and subordinates do not take responsibilities for the mistakes of the leaders, and leaders are approached directly. In hierarchy cultures, we see decision making is more centralized. Protocol, use of titles, sitting arrangements based on status is extremely important. And subordinates defer to leaders during disagreements. Subordinates take blame for and save face for leaders at all times, and leaders are approached through intermediaries. And this is important because people even trained in one culture may have notions that they fit more on the other end of the spectrum, especially, male female relationships. Sometimes you can see these in egalitarian and hierarchy relationships. Performance future orientation. Performance orientation is the extent to which a community encourages and rewards innovation, high standards, and performance improvement, where future orientation is the degree to which cultures are willing to sacrifice current wants to achieve future needs. Americans, we are performance orientated, and future orientation are others, but we have some people. But for the most part, some of us or most of us are performance people. As you can see, the US is up there with Hong Kong, South Korea, and the Netherlands, versus low is Italy, Mexico, Brazil, and UK. High performance organizations really emphasize results more than relationships, and they prioritize measurable goals and objectives in meetings and communication. They view feedback as essential to improvement, explicitly talk about financial incentives, and they value statements of individual accountability. They expect urgency in communications and emphasize deadlines. Low performance orientations emphasize relationships more than results, and they discuss goals, objectives, and casually without mechanisms for measuring them. They view feedback as judgmental and uncomfortable. They de-emphasize financial incentives and consider this motivation inappropriate for their employees. They value expressions of loyalty and sympathy, and they show a relaxed view of time and view of overemphasis on deadlines as pushy. And we can see time orientation across culture, and we see high future orientation with Netherlands, Germany, UK, Japan, and the US, and low with Italy, Taiwan, China, France. Communication practices include for a high and low future orientation cultures include high future orientation is emphasize control and planning for the future. They focus on more on intrinsic motivation. They frequently discuss long-term strategies as part of the business communication process. They use flexible and adaptive language. And they often mention long-term rewards and incentives a lot to people. Most appreciate visionary approaches to business platforms, whereas low future orientation companies or cultures, rather, they emphasize controlling current business problems, and they focus more on extrinsic motivation. They rarely discuss long-term strategies as part of communications. They use inflexible and firm language, and they often mention short-term rewards and incentives. They prioritize proven and routine approaches to problems. Assertiveness is a level of confrontation and directness that is considered appropriate and productive. Humane orientation is a degree to which an organization or society encourages and rewards individuals for being fair, altruistic, friendly, generous, caring, and kind. Assertive across culture, we see high in Germany, Hong Kong, and the US, low in Japan and Taiwan. High assertive cultures emphasize direct and um, ubiquitous language. Low assertive emphasize indirect and subtle language, whereas high assertive cultures are comfortable with silence and speak up quickly to fill the silence, whereas low view silence as a communication and respect nature. They high prioritize resolving issues over showing respect for others. Low prioritize showing respect over resolving issues, respect for others over resolving issues. High typically express more emotion, whereas low typically express less emotion. High use tough, even dominant language, whereas low use tender and pleasant language. High uses stress equality. They stress equality and use competitive language, whereas low stress equality and use cooperative language. So both use equality. They value, high uses value unrestrained expression of thoughts and feelings, whereas low value measured and disciplined expression of thoughts and feelings. So you can see as we go through these, depending on where you are and where you fit in, where the company culture is, how you may or may not fit in with certain organizations. So communication styles and high and low humane orientation cultures. High express greetings, welcome, concern, and appreciation in most interactions. They also consider taking time to talk about feelings as critical, and they volunteer to help others. They smile and display other nonverbal signs of welcome frequently. Whereas low express greetings and welcome informal interactions, they consider they consider taking time to talk about feelings as inefficient. They help others when asked, and they smile and display only nonverbal signs of welcome infrequently, and they are welcome infrequently. So, uncertainty avoidance, how cultures socialize members to feel in certain novel, surprising, or extraordinary situations. Whereas gender egalitarianism is the division of roles between men and women in society. So, what does high uncertainty avoidance look like? They document agreements and legal contracts. They expect orderly communication. They keep meticulous records, documents, conclusions drawn in meetings. They refer to formalized policies, procedures, and rules as a basis for decision making, and they verify with written communication. They prefer formality in the majority of the interpersonal business interactions. Under low uncertainty avoidance, they rely on the word of others they trust rather than contractual agreements or arrangements. They expect casual communication, less concerned with documentation and maintenance of meeting records. They feel unbound by formalized policies, procedures, and other rules when discussing work decisions with others. They verify with oral communication, and they expect informality in most interpersonal business interactions. Those high in gender egalitarianism provide equal professional opportunities to men and women, and they expect men and women to have the same communication and management styles. Guys, they also avoid protocol that draws attention to gender. Low gender egalitarianism provide more professional leadership opportunities to men. They expect men and women to communicate in distinct masculine and feminine ways, and they prefer protocol that draws attention to gender. So when we're building and maintaining cross-cultural work relationships, we should establish trust and show empathy. We should adopt a learner mindset and build a co-culture of cooperation and innovation. And also we see the diagrams that show us how each interferes with others. Now, and moving on and learning the etiquette of another culture. I'm big on etiquette. Following the rules of etiquette in other cultures can gain favorable first expressions. And guys, it really shows respect for others. There are rules for everything, including appropriate versus taboo topics of conversation, conversation style, punctuality and meetings, dining, touching, proximity, business dress, and gift giving. So when you work across generation, there's traditionalists, they're the silent generation. You don't hear much from them. Baby boomers, there's Generation X. We don't say much about Generation X. I think they're the in-between generation. And I came on that Generation X spectrum. And I think we got left out on a lot of things. You got Generation Y, you have the millennials and digital night natives. And then there's Generation Z, post millennials. So let's see, Gen Z is 2000 to, we haven't changed that over yet. We may have something different coming. Gen Y is 1982 to 1999. Gen X is 1965 to 1981. Boomers is 1946 to 1964. And traditionalists is 1925 to 1945. So tips for working with different generations. Really, guys, focus on individuals and their professional goals. Do not focus on their race and other things. Recognize the similarities across the generations or their age. Pay attention to preferred approaches to communications, and please observe appropriate formality and attire. Differences still exist in the way men and women communicate. They just do. Women tend to be more relationship oriented, collaborative, and interconnected in thinking, whereas men seem to be more independent, competitive, and linear in their thinking. So we can see men and women. We see high individualism in men, and in women, we see more in collectivist and women in individual cultures, less in individual, and sometimes they're there. But men are more in, and we see where men fall in the collective cultures. So tips for communicating across genders. We notice when professionals use speech patterns for task-based versus relationship-based reasons, and purposefully and consciously adopt your own style. Do your part to overcome biases. Types of cultural groups include people from certain regions, people from urban, suburban, or rural areas. Yes, they are different. Ethnic groups, occupational groups, and companies. Diversity, guys. Gen Yers and Gen Zers are the most sensitive to issues of diversity. They're the most sensitive. More focus on neurodiversity, physical disabilities, and mental illnesses. And that is it for chapter 4. So we covered a lot of information there. I hope I am not, I hope I'm getting to the point and giving you food for thought. I just wanted to go over those. You can read these yourself. If you're in my course, you can read these, of course, yourself, but sometimes I have people who need to listen to things. And so I tend to teach based on all, or coach, direct, or host based on all the particular learning styles that I may have in my class. And that's the reason for these videos. So take care. I'll see you in chapter 5.